to do. And I'm going to put everybody on mute, if you don't mind.
Do I get to?
Oh, I just cut you off, whoever that was. You can unmute yourself. Is that you, Andra?
That's me.
Hi. All right. So I want to begin. Tonight I decided I wanted to do some Purim Megillat Esther, since next Thursday night is Purim, so we won't be meeting here. Well, hopefully we'll all be one way or the other hearing the Megillah. If you want to know more about that, you can talk to me offline or read my guide. So I wanted to begin by imagining probably the most common phrase that's not spoken in the Megillah, at least not in the beginning, from Mordechai, was probably the phrase "Oi." Right? When Mordechai hears that all of the young women, including Esther, are going to be taken for the pageant before the King Ahasuerus, Mordechai must have sighed an "Oi." And when he overheard the plot against the king, I'm sure he said, "Oi." And when Haman determined that he was going to get permission from the king, and which he did, to slay all the Jews, I'm sure that Mordechai said, "Oi." So if you look up "Oi" in the dictionary, what you'll find is, according to the Webster Dictionary, an expression used when one wants to express dismay or exasperation. It is a form of sighing. Now, that caught my attention. And because occasionally, when I've got a lot on my mind or something's going on, I'll let out a deep sigh, kind of an oi sigh. And right away, if Linda's within hearing distance of me, what's wrong? What's the matter? What's going on? And right away gets very anxious. So I decided to look up a little bit about sighing, and I found a few interesting things online. What I found out was that there is healthy sighing and there is not so healthy sighing. And by the way, it turns out that the average person sighs approximately once every 5 minutes, or 12 times an hour. Sighing is a way to get the lungs to kind of relax. You let out some air. It helps your breathing. So that "oi," when you let that sigh of "oi," you're kind of taking a moment to kind of recalibrate oneself. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to go "oi." But, "Oy vezmir," if one is constantly going "oi" or "Oy vezmir," like that famous joke about the 3 older women in Miami Beach sitting on the porch in their rocking chairs. And one of them goes, "Oi." The other one goes, "Oy vey." The third one goes, "Oy vezmir." And one turns the other and says, "We promised we weren't going to talk about the kids." So if you're constantly in a state of anxiety, right, then that kind of sighing isn't healthy. However, there is the other side of an "oi." There's what we call a sigh of relief. A sigh of relief in Hebrew isn't "oi," it's nach, a noach. Noach, which from the word Noach, right, which is letting out a breath, a sigh of relief. So it's interesting that we find this type of sighing in the Megillah itself. Towards the end of the Megillah, we read the following. And I want to tie this into an interesting question. The question is that after the defeat of Haman, after Haman was hung and Ahasuerus signs a letter allowing, an igeret, a decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves, there still was a war, there still was a battle. The battle took place on the 13th of Adar outside of Shushan, on the 14th of Adar in Shushan, but we celebrate Purim on the 14th outside, on the 15th, the day after the war, the day after the miraculous defeat of the Jews against all of those that were followers of Haman. Haman was no longer in power, no longer in office, but still his followers still followed through and wanted to slay the Jewish people. We won that battle. Great miracle. Let's eat, but not today. We do it tomorrow. So the question is, why? So if we take a look at the end of towards the end of the Megillah, in chapter 9, beginning with verse 16, it says, regarding the Jews outside of Shushan, the rest of the Jews throughout the king's provinces organized and defended themselves, v'noach me'oivehem, gaining relief from their foes, right? But then it says they did not lay their hands on, that was on the 13th day of the month. And then it says, v'noach ba'arba asa, but they gained relief on the 14th. So the question is, why do we celebrate Purim primarily? You can still read the Megillah on the 13th, you have no choice, but you read it on the 14th. Why do we read it on the day after rather than on the day of the miracle? So, or celebrated the day of the. So the answer is, like many of our periods in Jewish history, where we go me yagon l'simcha, right? We go from anxiety to joyous relief. We can't celebrate when we're in the middle of the anxiety. We couldn't celebrate leaving Egypt until after the splitting of the Reed Sea. Only then was Az Yashir Moshe. Only then could Moshe sing, right? After the final conclusion, when you're through it all, not in the midst of it, but when it's all over, upon reflection, you can have that sigh of relief. So too, we couldn't celebrate until after we were able to be fully relieved of the threat that Haman had initiated. I'd like to suggest in the text, we find this in the text, because it says on the 13th, v'noach me'oivehem. If you permit me some homiletic rabbinics, v'noach, they had a sigh of relief from oivechem, from their ois. Up until now, it was all oi with Haman, right? Oi with all of what's happening. Now they had Noach relief, but on the 14th, it was all Noach. They could have a sigh of relief, a healthy sigh. And so what we can derive out of this is that when we give a sigh, right, that sometimes it's a, right? We just got to recalibrate ourselves, figure out, in other words, it's a chance to figure out. And when when I let out that kind of sigh, I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to deal with this situation, right? Whether it's something that I have to deal with, multiple things that I have to deal with, a problem that requires solving, somebody just unloaded a lot of stuff on me and I've got to figure out how to deal with it. That's when I let out that deep kind of yagon, that hoy. But afterwards, right, when I figured out a solution to the problem, it's kind of enough, right? It's a different type of sigh. Those are both healthy sighs. But the sigh that is joyous and to be celebrated is when you can noach, when you can literally breathe out a breath of relief. I want to tie this into another thought regarding the Megillah. And that has to do with what really is a miracle. We know that within the story of Purim, it says, right, that everything is turned upside down. The Megillah story is an inverted story. In other words, it's a story where we find God without God ever being mentioned. Right? In other words, it's all about coincidence. Everything is a coincidence, right? the first two chapters deal with Esther becoming the queen. We're not even introduced to Haman until the third chapter. As the Gemara teaches us, right? God brings the refuah before the makeh. God brings the antidote before the disease, right? Already by the third chapter, we're introduced to Haman. Esther has already been implanted in the palace, right? What a coincidence. Oh, and by the way, right before that, the end of that chapter 2 that I just read, we're going to look at it again. Mordechai uncovers a plot to assassinate the king, right? And gets written in that book that coincidentally is read by the king, right at the right moment, right? And it's one coincidence after another coincidence, when he remembers the king, he says, how can I honor? What should I do for somebody I want to honor? He asks Haman, and Haman thinks it's him. What a coincidence. It turns out to be Mordechai. One thing after the other, after the other. If I would ask you, though, what's a miracle? What's a miracle? You would tell me, the splitting of the Red Sea was a miracle. Bilam's donkey speaking to him, that was a miracle. The man falling from heaven, right? Bread falling from the sky, that's a miracle. You know what? There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, on the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avot, that says that on the at twilight of the very first Shabbat, right? The end of, very, very end of creation, twilight in the evening, right before Shabbat started, God created 10 things. You know what it says he created? He created the earth that split and swallowed up Korach. He created the donkey that spoke. He created the staff of Moshe that did all the miracles in Egypt. He created the manna from heaven, and so on. What is this Mishnah teaching us? You know what it's teaching us? That embedded in creation, embedded in the natural order of things, were these miracles. So it's opposite. We would think those are big miracles. And the Mishnah said, no, those aren't big miracles. Those are exceptions to nature that God built into nature to happen at the right time. Not such a big miracle. You know what a big miracle is? When one thing happens, when these things, little things all add up to one big outcome that you wouldn't expect. I think the best example for our generation would be the 6-Day War in 1967. If that wasn't a miracle, and if you read about it, if you read about all the events that lead up to Israel being able to destroy the Syrian and Egyptian armies before they ever, not the armies, the Air Force, before they were ever to take off, right? And then the sequence of events that happened after that, leading up to the reunification of Yerushalayim and Jerusalem, that is a miracle. The story of the Megillah is about a miracle. Is about what we would consider to be hidden miracles. That's truly a hidden miracle. The other ones, the Mishnah Pirkei Avot already told us those things were built into nature. They weren't such big miracles. That they happened when they happened, that was the miracle. Not that the earth opened up, not that manna fell from heaven. Those weren't miracles. The miracle was they happened when God designated they should happen. That was the miracle. Lastly, I want to share with you an insight from a passage that I alluded to. In the end of the 2nd chapter of the Megillah, Mordechai uncovers the plot, the assassination plot of Bigtan and Teresh. But there's a very strange verse. This verse goes as follows. V'yivada hadavar leMordechai v'yaged leEsther hamalka v'toma Esther lemelech b'shem Mordechai. The plot became known to Mordechai, who told it to Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordechai's name. What's going on here? Why is it that, why didn't Mordechai just go to the king and tell the king? Why does it say he told it to Esther, and Esther told the king in Mordechai's name? So one answer, perhaps the easiest answer, is Esther had access to the king, and Mordechai maybe didn't have access to or easy access to the king. But I saw two interpretations. One in a commentary of the Chida, Rav Chaim David, Rav Chaim Yosef David Azulai, late 18th century biblical scholar, and another one from the Al-Sheikh. And what they both basically say, what the Nachlat Eshkol, the Chida, says is Mordechai wasn't interested in a reward. He was afraid if he went to the king would think he's coming looking for some kind of reward, some kind of remuneration or status from, and he didn't. All he cared about was saving the king. All he cared about was saving another human being. And therefore, he didn't want that there should be any thought. So he figured let it be anonymous. Let Esther be the one to tell him. And it says they investigated, they found that the plot was true, and he was saved from the plot. So Mordechai was being completely altruistic, which is a lesson for us. But the Al-Sheikh says something even more beautiful. He says, Mordechai wanted Esther to get the credit because what he cared about was he said, listen, here's a chance to help the queen out, to help Esther to have a better relationship with the king. So he wanted to be altruistic and do something good for Esther. But you know what? Esther turned it back on him. Esther turns around and says, oh, don't give me the credit. The credit goes to Mordechai. And there are those that say, the Al-Sheikh says, it was because of this concern that they were each trying to throw credit to the other. It was on the merit of them trying to throw credit to each other, to care about each other. He says, because the Al-Sheikh says, if a person is in it only for themselves, then what is the meaning of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha? You should love your neighbor as yourself. It has no meaning. If I'm only in it for myself and I don't care about everybody else or the next person, then what's it all about? And here, again, this is all happening before, this is literally a few verses, 2 verses before the introduction of Haman. And the Al-Sheikh says, this message of that caring for one another, of each one trying to, no, not for me, no, you take the credit, I care about you, that's what saved us from Haman. So I think, we have enough examples, far more than we should have, of people who are in it for themselves. People who are looking out for themselves. People who aren't looking out for others. But it's so beautiful, especially within our Jewish community, when you see how much people do and can do for each other, how much we look after each other, how much we care for each other, all the chesed that we do for each other. This is really the underlying message. Without that attitude, maybe God wouldn't have spared us and wouldn't have allowed us this hidden miracle of Purim to begin with. So I think there's a lot of messages for us to carry away. The first is, don't be afraid to sigh. Sighing is good, whether it's a sigh to relieve yourself from stress, or whether it's a sigh of relief having figured out how to get out from underneath that stress. Both those types of sighing are good and healthy for our bodies. If we sigh excessively, then what I read online was that can be a sign of anxiety and or depression or even PTSD. So watch out for that. So if you're sighing more than once every 5 minutes, maybe you need to see a physician or a therapist. But short of that, it's okay to let out a sigh every now and then. And of course, the most important thing is that we look after each other, that we try to throw credit to the other person when deserved and not try to take it for ourselves. I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. I wish everybody next week an easy fast and a good Purim, as hard as it's going to be. Hopefully we'll get all the information about all the different ways that you can hear Zachor this weekend and all the ways you can hear the Megillah reading next weekend. Already there were some errors in the information that went out in the e-notes. We'll correct it. We'll get all the Zoom addresses out for those that need it and want it. And by next week, we'll make sure that everybody can celebrate Purim in a spirit of happiness and joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom, everyone.
shalom.
Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos.
Bye.
Yasher koach, Rabbi.
Thank you.
you.